Hello. Nice to see everyone join us today. Thanks very much for joining us. As always, it's myself here, Ian Bennett, and Anna Marika's here as well, helping manage the lobby. Um, the topic for today is governance of SharePoint and Teams. It's not the most interesting topic for some, but it is super important, and therefore we are running a session on it. Interesting, when I did this front slide, I Googled governance images, and I thought, oh, let's put an image on there, but they were so awful, I would have fallen asleep looking at them. So I've put a couple of memes up, so hopefully that kicks us off on the right mindset for the old governance. Right, just general housekeeping. We are recording this session, so give me a couple of days to maybe edit it and take out some errors or mistakes that I might make during this live session. But yeah, we'll get a recording out to you hopefully by Friday, if not by Monday. For anyone who didn't attend, obviously feel free to share it with your team if you feel value in that way. We also have Q&A, so along the top bar there should be a Q&A section. So Anna Marika is going to be managing the questions, and we'll try and answer them at the end. If there's anything that you have particularly kind of personal to your site and your situation, and you don't want to put in a Q&A, then feel free to send me a meeting invite, and we can talk through your own situations as well. Because of course, governance sometimes shows things that you don't really want to talk about publicly. So yeah, let's get started because there's a lot to cover. And I'll just make sure that everyone's joining muted, but yep, good to see you all. Anyway, let's get going. So governance of SharePoint and Teams. Right. Okay, so the reason I thought we'd have this is I'm getting more and more clients or prospects or people talking to me about their Teams and their SharePoint. I'm getting like a common theme of comments through, like, I'm not sure who has access to what, or we've got too many teams. It's just kind of chaos. Like, people use the chaos word quite a bit. I can't find anything. There's too many clicks. I'm having to navigate like into things, and then it's the wrong place, and I have to go back out and go back into somewhere else. So there's a bit of kind of structure errors there. And then the sites of teams that I actually had no idea about. I actually had one client ask me to write a script to add them as a member of every single team in the organization. And then if someone adds a new team, that they get added as a member to it, because they wanted to have some oversight and visibility over all of those teams. Now, I'll talk to them about, well, actually, you don't really want to, because that would be a nightmare if you actually had hundreds of teams that you're having to delve in and out of. In reality, you just probably won't. So the idea of governance is actually to put some visibility in place so you can actually see what's happening inside of your environment without actually having to be a member of everything and being involved in everything within your environment. So that's what we're going to cover today. But the reason why people seem to get themselves into a bit of a pickle is because Microsoft make it very easy for users to create and share content. So you can share from SharePoint, you can share from your Teams, you can share from groups, you can share from OneDrive. There's like a whole array of places where you can add content and then you can share it. You can share it internally and you can share it externally. And we're going to cover some of those sharing things a little bit later on. But Microsoft make it really easy, which is great for productivity and actual business use cases. It's fantastic. However, that then exposes you to some risk, and therefore you need to have some oversight and some management of that, what's being created. Because I would probably say that you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know if one of your team members had created a team, they've enabled external sharing, they've put a bunch of files in there, and then they've externally shared all of those files. So that's why we have to have that oversight and management layer, and that's what we're calling governance. Right. So just looking at some of the solutions. So what could we do actually to prevent some of these issues? So the first thing is, of course, having a planned deployment strategy. So before you even started using Teams and SharePoint, actually building that structure correct from day one and having it right so that people didn't need to go and create new content and things like that. But of course, your environment will always grow. There'll always be a need for people to create some content, a new team for a project, or other areas of your business. So we can't always get it right for day one, but what we can do is have procedures in place from day one and say, if you're going to add a new team, then this is what you have to do when you create a new team. So we're getting more and more requests about cleanup, like we are in a mess and how do we get through and actually get ourselves into a bit of a tidy structure. So then we have to do a stock take and an audit of your current content. And then the strategy from that is essentially to go back to the planning your development strategy and work out what it is that you actually need and want. And then we have to migrate from what you've got into that with a bit of a cleanup on the way. So we are now doing that fairly frequently. Then the other option is to implement policies, which you can have policies to block users from being able to create new content. You could block them from creating SharePoint sites and block them from creating new teams and new channels. And you've got private channels. Every time you create a private channel, you're essentially creating a brand new SharePoint site with different permissions in there. So you can actually just flat right just say no one's going to do anything and kind of block those. I'm more of a fan about enabling it, but enabling it with some guidelines and parameters, and which comes down to user training. So we can offer user training to the people that are going to be creating that content, and we can have specific content owner training. So if you are going to be an owner of a team, what are your responsibilities as that owner? How do you make sure that things are being shared genuinely as part of your the purpose of that team? So, and of course, the ultimate solution is to implement some governance. So that's what we're going to talk about today. There's a thing called Workspace lifecycle management. So first off, when we talk about workspaces, we're actually talking about the SharePoint and the Teams and Microsoft groups and OneDrive. I'll probably refer to things as Teams because that seems to be the most common problem. So Teams obviously had a massive explosion during COVID. We are seeing clients now with hundreds and hundreds of teams. So they have like way more teams than they actually have people, which I'm not sure if that kind of maths really works. But a team is a collection of people and they collaborate and work in a space. And that's what we call workspaces, but that also could be a SharePoint site as well. So I don't want to delve. In fact, our next webinar is specifically about SharePoint, so we could talk a little bit more about that later. But just in this context, workspaces could be anything inside of that Office 365, so SharePoint Teams, OneDrive, or SharePoint groups. So so there's three core aspects. So you've got the provisioning, and then the maintenance, and then the decommissioning. So that's the life cycle of those workspaces. The provisioning, the biggest problem, like I've already mentioned, the biggest problem is that people create teams without sometimes some of the thought process behind it. Like, is there already a team that already serves that purpose? Is there a team that has the same group of people, and therefore it's not really a new team where you could potentially just add a channel to an existing team, which creates a separate conversation thread. So part of it is about making those decisions about provisioning the teams correctly. But how we handle that then is you have a workspace request process. So instead of just creating a workspace, you request to create a workspace. And then we have an approval process. So you have some responsible people within your organization that can actually then approve the creation of those workspaces. And they could do the due diligence to make sure that there's not duplication and things like that. But the coolest thing about the third-party tools that we use is the templated workspaces. So if let's say you run a lot of projects and you wanted a templated project every single time you create a new team, and in there you can have things like prefixes and suffixes to project names and things like that. So that's where the templating comes in. But the most important thing is actually around the policies. So you can by default disable external sharing so that when people are creating those teams or putting the requests in, it doesn't get forgotten that people are going to disable the external sharing. And then, of course, if someone needs to then externally share, then you can enable it. But it's kind of like putting that protection in. So someone's consciously deciding to enable it rather than forgetting to disable it, if that makes sense. Then we've got inventory management. So part of that maintenance, once you have all of those sites, then we want to be looking at how we actually review and audit the content that we have. So for these businesses that have, like 100 team sites, what you want to do is put in place a review cycle of saying, I'm going to review this every 12 months, Or there could be some core teams that you know are never going to change. So you can have the company-wide teams, and you might have HR and finance. Like they're never going to expire, never going to disappear. So you would set those to not needing reviews. But when it comes to like projects or temporary teams that need to be established, then you would implement this review cycle. So you would look at, so orphan teams essentially are teams that the owners have left the company. So that's a big indicator that those teams are possibly due for either recycling or repurposing. Then you've got unutilized teams. So when was the last conversation happened in the team? When was their last documents added to that team? If they're underutilized, they kind of red flag, and then we can be like, well, what are we going to do with them? Delete them, or archive them, or what have you, or promote them, because if there's a genuine purpose for it, then promote it and get people using it again. Then there's access reviews, so who has access to the content within that team, and then data storage reviews. So, if you're breaching data capacity, then you want to look at those data storage reviews. Then you got decommissioning. So you're essentially making a decision of whether you want to keep those teams or SharePoint sites or OneDrive users. You're going to keep them for another review period, or you're going to archive them, or you're going to delete them. Now, I'll just cover the differences between archiving and deleting. So archiving as a process is actually just to remove all the members from the team, and therefore it just stays in the background. Nobody really has access to it, but if you ever need to have access to it, you can then assign that person back in. They can then have a look at the files and the conversations, extract out what they need, and then remove them again. So that's how we do the archiving. Or you just plain delete it. Really, we only go down the delete path if you actually are hitting your storage capacity. Otherwise, a lot of clients are, they're 200 or 300 gigs, and you have over a terabyte of storage. So it's not a major concern to keep them in the archives on the back burner. But if you are hitting that capacity, then we'd look at deleting them. And then you just have to bear in mind, like if you're deleting content out, do you actually have backups, and do you actually have retention of that data, so that if worst case scenario, you've deleted it and you actually then needed to go back and restore some of that data, you can actually do so through the backup. So yeah, just be cautious of the delete, but certainly archive or keep. So archive's just that hygiene. It's just making sure that all of the teams that you have are being utilized, and if they're not, you can clear them out. I always like to talk about the rule of 7. To me, I think if I have more than 7 teams and I have more than 7 channels within 7 teams, I'm probably beyond that. I'm probably never going to look at anything else. So it kind of seems a little bit kind of pointless having that. But again, as kind of the owner of the company, I end up being involved in every single team. But yeah, I have to kind of consciously start navigating my way through. But as a standard user, I think beyond 7, you just start to lose track of where things are. So that's something to consider. Okay, so let's have a look at this provisioning. So provisioning control. So you see here, I've put through a request to create a team, and the approver of the organization, which also happens to be me, receives this request, and you could drill in and find out exactly what the purpose of that team is. But the idea is that we are managing proliferation, so we don't want 1,000 teams being created. You can control who can and can't submit these requests, so you can make, department managers able to request a team, but not users, for example. But you can also apply custom metadata. Now, any of those of you who've gone down the SharePoint path and we've talked about metadata, you might understand what that is. But essentially, you could categorize the teams beyond just being a team. Inside of teams, it's pretty hard to determine, types of teams and things like that. So custom metadata, we can create departmental teams. We can tag them with, who's the primary caretaker of that team and things like that. So we can start tagging things. You can even tag it with sensitivity labels. So having the ability to say, this is a finance team. It has sensitive documents. We are only going to, share it with people that have access to that sensitivity label. So that's a really important thing. And then you got the ability to add prefix and suffix to the team names to kind of build some logic around that. You've got permissions, so setting permissions, so who has access to it by default, defining team members and the owners, and then the biggest thing really is that last one, so setting the policies to make sure that things are correct, and then you can deploy folder structures and things like that based off a template. So it's pretty cool. So we can take a look at that further if you want to run in through those details. Then we've also got inventory management. So This is the ability to have a look through what you've already got. And there's things like highlighting new teams or new sites that have been created. So without you even being involved or being a member, you'd be able to identify any new content inside of your organization, or inactive workspaces. So, showing things that haven't haven't had files or conversations added, and you can clean those up. And then we can set up alerts, so you can have policies around alerting. So I can alert for when a file is shared externally, or when the administrators are changed, or there's a sharing policy changed, or whether the sensitivity labels have changed on either a document or a folder or a library itself. So those are really cool alerts that we can put in place to make sure that you're aware of those changes. Then we've got security compliance, which I'm not going to drill into, but essentially it's a dashboard that tells you all of the things that you might need to know, and you can set up alerts and rules and behaviors around that. So in this example, you've got orphaned workspaces, so workspaces without active owners, and a whole bunch of other things in there. So that just helps you manage and maintain the site structure. And then, of course, the final step of that lifecycle management is whether you can keep, archive, or delete. So this is actually prompting the content owners. So the owners of the teams, they'll get a prompt to say, do you want to keep it? Are you going to archive it, or are you going to delete it? So that's all automated. Some other benefits is managing user access, to reporting on who has access to what content. So you could say who has access to this team or this site, but you could also do it in reverse. So which users, you could pick the user and see what access they have. So when you have new staff members, you could say, well, they're kind of filling the same role as this other person, and therefore you can see what access that other person had. You can audit the user action, so you can see exactly who did what and when. So when they created files, deleted files, they've read or modified files, sites, or any other content inside of Office 365. So that could be really handy. Or you could clean up old users, so removing and blocking permissions. You could change ownership of a team, so one staff member's left and you want to add another owner of the team in. But just cleaning up old users, of course, optimizes licenses and saves on costs. Now, just talk about problem number 2, so oversharing. So we had a recent client that we ran an audit, and we uncovered over 35,000 anonymous sharing links. I'm probably going to end up having to do a completely separate session just about sharing inside of Office 365, but just a very quick run through. By default, Microsoft has these 4 settings for sharing. So you have the anyone, the people within your organization, the people with existing access, and people you choose. We, as when we manage your sites, we would disable by default the top 2 if we can. So, because the risk is sharing with anyone actually exposes your links and files to anyone in the world who potentially could have that link. There's also even sharing with people within your organization. Some people think that's the quickest way of just sharing, but actually what you're doing is saying anyone inside of your domain can now access that file. It is not true that sometimes some people think that if you just send the link to someone, only the people that would receive that email would ever find that link. What is now becoming the kind of biggest concern is, so this is the sharing link here. It is just a string of numbers. So you just got to bear in mind that I personally think there is a risk that someone is going to, if they've not done it already, create robots that are going to sit there and just try and spam all of the randomly generated numbers to see if they hit some results, and find sensitive data and then hold you to ransom over that data and stuff like that. Like that's totally feasible. But otherwise, the biggest risk at the moment is when people are looking at things like Copilot. So the ability for a staff member to start searching documents. So you might kind of genuinely search for where's my employment contract. If any employment contract has been granted a sharing link that is either anonymous or people in the entire organization, it is going to return that as a result, because technically they have been granted access to it. Even though they haven't been sent the link, they have permission to access that file. And therefore, that's kind of the biggest issue that we have to resolve there. There is a catch with permissions. So essentially, permissions are set at a tenancy level. So we can dial it down and lock down the permissions at a tenant level. But then as soon as you want to do it at a site or a team level and enable it, we actually have to enable it at the tenant level, So then what we have to do is, so enable it at lieutenant level and then disable it at every single site and team level, except for the one that you asked us for, which is fine because we could do that when we very first, get the request. But then when you start adding more teams and more sites, who is going to remember to dial the settings back down again to stop the external sharing? And so that's where having the policies and the governance in place to stop that from happening and kind of eliminating that risk, that's where it becomes really, really important. Okay. Just a little quick tip really is just to make sure that if you are doing anonymous sharing links, it's probably best practice to set an expiry date in there to prevent, having the issues in the first place. Providing some user training, looking at auditing and seeing who has created sharing links, cleaning them up, setting the expiry, or creating policies to block it from happening. Right. Here's a quick tip, which I don't have a huge amount of time to run through, but essentially the biggest cause that I find where people are creating sharing links is because internally they just want to say, hey, take a look at this file. So they would click the share, grab the link, send it to their colleague. They already have access, so you actually don't have to give them a sharing link. So what I find the best way to do is actually to share the file path, because you don't have to grant them permissions, they already have it. And therefore, to do that, you click on the three dots, click on details, click on more details, and then copy the direct link, which is the file path to that file. So long as they have permissions to it, they'll be able to click that link. But I just wish Microsoft didn't hide it so far down in the menu there. If it could have just been next to that share button, like copy path, and then you wouldn't have so many sharing links. But that's one little top tip. Okay, Copilot preparation to clean up. Like we say, you've actually, if you're thinking of turning it on, make sure you clean up those sharing links, because that's going to expose a huge amount of data to people that you possibly never intended to expose it to. Our tool set, you can just select the files. You can select them in mass, and then you could just click stop sharing, and then it just disables all of the sharing links. So it's not a big job to remove it. It's just you wouldn't have known about it in the first place. So that's why we have the tools. Okay, problem number 3, external guests. So our audit tools uncovered that a former staff member who was a sales rep of another client, they had externally shared all of the company files to their own Gmail accounts. IT had disabled their work account on the exit of the organization, but that person had continued to access all of the company content way beyond their employment. So the question is, do you know how many external guest users that you have on your tenant? External sharing is hugely important. It's a massive benefit of SharePoint to be able to share a file with anyone in the world. But do you know that that's happening? Do you know what is being shared, who has access, when they last accessed, all of those types of questions. Obviously, Gmail accounts would red flag to me. I'd be like, well, we work business to business, so therefore we'd expect everyone to have a domain, a proper email address. But yeah, in this case, it was their own personal Gmail. So I don't know if there's anything malicious by it, but they certainly shouldn't have had access, and they did. So we were able to audit that one. And then the fourth problem is managing storage. So there's a number of tenants out there that have breached their data capacity. So you get 1 terabyte plus 10 gigs of storage for every licensed staff member within your organization. Above and beyond that, so let's say you had 50 staff, that's was that 1.5 terabytes. Once you breach that, then you have to pay 38 cents per gig per month. So a lot of people don't even have any visibility over what their data storage is, but obviously our governance tools give you those reports. The challenge you've got with data storage is the most common cause of the data storage breaching is the version control. So by default, a SharePoint or a Teams document library by default has 500 versions for every file. So every time you save the file, it creates a new version, and it has a history of 500 by default. But you can imagine that if you have a 1 gig file, which admittedly is quite a large file, but just for easy maths, you have a 1 gig file, and you have 500 versions of that, you now have 500 gigs in a single file, and therefore that's how people seem to breach their data capacity. So what we want to do is reduce those versions down, except for if you genuinely need them for legal reasons. But the problem is you can't retrospectively remove versions on all files. So if you are in that situation, then let us know and we can run these tools and kind of clean that up for you. But yeah, that's a bit of a challenge. Right. So next up is actually what is our governance plans. So we basically, it comes in 3 flavors. So we have a management plan, security plan, and the governance plan. So management is really just the reporting stage. So it gives you visibility and oversight, but not necessarily the ability to fix anything. You have to manually go in and go and fix the things. You do get a review meeting with me, so we can talk about best practices and things like that. The security plan is everything in management, but also has auditing and alerting. So it's a little bit more proactive. So you could subscribe to the reports. So rather than you having to go and look, they're just going to come through to your mailbox to say someone has created a new team and it has external sharing, for example, and then you could go and investigate it. And then the full governance plan is that lifecycle automation. So that's emailing the content owners to say, like, you own this team. Do you still need it? Do you want to clean it up? Do you want to, review it for another 12 months? That has the provisioning control, so that locks down users from being able to create the teams or sites. So it has that approval process, and then some other things. And I'll just add a little comment because I know we have a lot of our IT partners on this call. But essentially, what this means is IT can empower the users themselves to manage and control their own data without needing to elevate them to admin permissions. So in reality, you can actually do a lot of this stuff in the admin centers of Office 365, but those are very rarely exposed to the users themselves. And you have to drill in and go find all the stuff, whereas the reports just tell you what's there. So it's a really cool tool, really important in my opinion. It doesn't matter whether you're a small business or a large organization, you still need to have some oversight. In fact, it's probably the smallest ones that potentially have more risk involved around that, because generally speaking, smaller businesses put everything into one library and try and share things out from there, but that does expose you to a little bit more risk. So if you want to have a talk through a little bit more specifically about your own scenarios, then feel free to reach out to me and we can set up a call and we could go through this. Right. Next up is our next webinar, which is actually specifically about SharePoint. SharePoint is more than just file storage. Find out how others are maximizing this. So we know a lot of people, they see SharePoint as just file repository. They move from things like Dropbox or from a server, put it into SharePoint, and then they kind of work as though they used to work before they did that migration. So to me, to add the value into that SharePoint is really important and, a great value add for the organization. So you feel free to join that session. The QR code's just there. And if you want to jump on and book a meeting with me, either go to our website or just email me there. We can arrange that. I appreciate I'll talk you very fast through this to try and get through that content. We will send the recording out and you'll be able to rewatch it again in 0.5 speed, perhaps. For now, we'll just have a look at the Q&As.
No, we had one question come through that would be useful for others to be aware of as well, and it was your quick tip, Ian, for being able to see the path of the file rather than just doing the copied link. And the comment was that sometimes when you go into that, if there's been lots of edits on that file, it's a long way to have to scroll down. So either keep persisting until you see it, or there is another way in, and that is to open up the file, then go into the file menu and choose info, and in there is a button to copy the link. So you can grab that and that will then be the link for the path, not the actual link.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I have exactly the same problem. When you think I'll just scroll, and I'll be like a couple more scrolls, and I'll get to the bottom, and sometimes it's infinite, and it's really annoying because it shows at the bottom, and you think you can just about click it, and then it expands back out, and it drops further down. I wish it was at the top, and even better, I wish it was just in the document row itself that I could just copy the path.
Fingers crossed, Microsoft will learn that along the way and add it in for us.
Yeah, well, actually, now I've said that out loud, we could probably build that as a view in the document library and actually code it ourselves. So maybe we'll have a think about that one. All right, so hopefully everyone sees the value in the governance. It was a very quick session. If you book a meeting, we could go into a lot more detail, and I can even show you around the reports and the portal to see what you can see. But for now, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll catch you again on the 12th of June.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Thank you.